we were talking from Twitter or from X now. You wanted to talk more around, I imagine, the juxtaposition between Latter-day Saints and Christianity.
Yeah, so I watched your video that you did where you were breaking down Melchizedek, and there was a couple things that stood out to me that I wanted to go through and make sure I have the correct understanding. And then yeah, there would be a juxtaposition to, I think, how we approach original sin, Melchizedek, and the mission of Christ, compared to the Latter-day Saint position. And so anyway, that's my speculation. And just totally upfront so everyone knows where I'm coming from. I live in Utah. I was raised LDS, and then it was early on, maybe 14 to 16. I went into rebellion and left the LDS church. And then about 19, I is when I would say that I was saved and came into a relationship with Christ, and has been growing ever since then in a very bumpy road until, here we are now. So 35.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, I saw your number from Utah and I was like, wait, is this a Latter-day Saint or yeah. So no.
Yeah.
So yeah. So that's why I saw that and I was like, oh wait. Okay, cool. Yeah. So I guess a little bit of my background is I am a very late convert to Latter-day Saints. I was 32, so it was actually just last December. And I had a very Joseph Smith like personal experience, so to speak. And so I wrote, I guess in 2018, I had a lose your mind, find your soul kind of experience. Call it whatever you want. And so I wrote the first book, Remembrance, which I guess theologically speaking is identical to the theology of Latter-day Saint, in the emanation of gold, so to speak, is the best way I can describe it. I was a Kabbalist or Kabbalah, which is all Hebrew. And so I guess as I was like going through the Zohar and reading it, so I guess the way Kabbalah does it is like you kind of scan it and I guess you feel or see or have some sort of insight from doing it. So anyway, so while doing that, I started to have visions is honestly the best way I can describe it, but they were in the emanation of gold, and that was relatively public. I was not particularly religious. I didn't grow up religious. I was very spiritual and I was always on that journey, but and so theologically speaking, a lot of things were identical. But all of that to say that I think my purview is a little bit different than the cultural Latter-day Saints that grew up in the church, from what I've understood. Even though we believe the identical text is just, I guess, a very different way of looking at it. I guess I would sometimes associate that with like the looking glass, or I use that term a lot, and I guess that's a little bit of how I see that.
And maybe this is for a whole nother video. I would love to really dive into your the Kabbalism and going through the Zohar and everything. I've been learning about this as of late. I am curious. So is that your heritage, or how did you come into Kabbalism?
So this is gonna be, this is somewhat, so I guess long story short, I am an only child. From a very young age, I've always felt very spiritual. In fact, when I was very young, I could see things that other people couldn't see. And I think the world would be just to call me crazy if so much of if I guess to some extent become such a successful neoliberal in the stock market, in that kind of a world. All that to say is I guess I always had an affinity for spirituality, but I was always religiously adverse. I grew up culturally Catholic. I hate the word cultural, and the word hate, but I guess I grew up Catholic, not understanding it really. And I don't think most people do, or at least I didn't at that time. And so when I grew up, so sorry, I was never a particular fan of religion. I had a relatively eventful, I guess, teenage and childhood. I ended up ultimately moving into like television and film, moved to Los Angeles, and the spiritual impulse was never particularly gone. So I guess I'll address this now. Um I think whenever you're spiritually inclined to any degree, and the things of the world don't resonate, and I do believe that we live in a black mirror, or that we have been. And so even theologically speaking, the Bible, as it was explained to me when I was younger, it didn't resonate with me, but I was still on the quest for spirituality. All that to say, I had a I guess a deep reverence for the spiritual world from a positive standpoint. And because the spiritual world that I knew growing up didn't make sense, I ended up kind of going into Freemasonry. I had a very short active stint there, but I was, right. So I might as well say that now. Um, and then that kind of led me to Kabbalah, because they were very close. I lived on La Cienega in San Vicente, and in Los Angeles, or Santa Monica and San Vicente. So we're pretty much next to each other. So I think on the spiritual quest, one led to another. And then I had a very tumultuous, quote unquote, awakening or spiritual experience. I, from hindsight, maybe believe that part of that was because of the implicit or explicit spiritual contracts we make, even if they're not overtly aware when we join. I at the very least spiritually ambiguous spiritual organizations, or I guess I would say polarity ambiguous, where they're like good, bad, like what's actually going on here. um and so my path to Christianity was, so I had a very Moses like experience during my time in Kabbalah prior to becoming Christian. And what I mean by that is I had always an affinity. I'm not a lawyer, but I had an affinity to law and natural law generally, or sacred geometry. And from that standpoint, um, and so one thing led to another, and so I had a very intense spiritual awakening, so to speak, that I think was good. It was like a purge, but it was like the death of natural man, or what I would see like the resurrection, or resurrection or crucifixion of the natural man. Um, and so all things neoliberal, I kind of walked away from abruptly. So I went from like a trading and investing like YouTube channel and living in West Hollywood, and that kind of world, to like abruptly walking away from it. All of that to say that um as I was getting revelation, there was markers that I was able to see on a live stream that people can go back and confirm at any point. But so amidst the Kabbalah world, I had a Holy Spirit experience, and I think the best way to explain it is that when all this revelation kind of like activates in your heart, and you're like, this is so different. I've never felt anything like this. And then the world as I knew it fell from under me, because what I thought was love was things that, because once you felt that, you suddenly realize like everything else must have been an illusion. It couldn't. This is so true and so different and so pure and so profound that it's undeniably true in anything I've known prior. So I guess the way I explain or see the way I came to back to Christ or Christianity, or at least that activated within me, was the intense prophetic divination or sight or revelation from the standpoint of the Moses truth, law, righteous indignation. This was coming into COVID, to then that moving to like the next octave. So then I always said, gosh, I love Kabbalah, but now being so profoundly Christian, I wish there was something like it that acknowledged the Christian dispensation, or the, and in my mind, the way that plays out is moving from the root to the sacral to the solar plexus to the heart, and therein lies Christ, east, west, above, below, within, without. So, and ironically, during this time, in finance, half of the company was Christian, the other half was Jew, or excuse me, Latter-day Saint, the other half was Jewish. And even through being really good friends through all of this, I would explain, for example, like your soulmates or twin flames is like a quantum entanglement, which is a ceiling, a temple ceiling, so to speak. And I guess, and no one ever told me like, hey, we believe the things, or like that's our doctrine, but maybe the linguistic gap was there, and so they just didn't So when missionaries came back around to my house, and I gave it a second look, I was like, wait, the Leahon, that's like the Son and 72 names of God, and I was like, wait, explain that to me one more time. And I was like, oh, and so then I had like this, oh my gosh, this is true. Because, but when I really joined Latter-day Saints is, I was institutionally religiously adverse, but I had a sequence before I knew Melchizedek was a thing. Okay. So like, I didn't know that that was like a word in the, like, I was not familiar with the term at all. So I had this, long chain, vision sequence, whatever you want to call it, of the Mars to Mercury corridor, which was basically, and it was like, no, it was like, and then I heard Melchizedek, and it was like DNA from Mars to Mercury, and then healing through Christ, and then I was, and then, but Melchizedek was so clear and distinct to me, so much so that when I was running for office, I changed all of my banners across all of my social media to Melchizedek's corridor. Um, and so I somehow, like on the second or third meeting when the missionaries came, I was like, look, I had this very intense revelation about Melchizedek, and I just don't see myself joining any church after that or whatever. And they were like, that's what we call our priesthood. And I was like, wait, you've heard, you know what this word is? And like that was a done deal at that point. And so that was super long-winded, but that was my soliloquy to answer, I think, your Kabbalah
Yeah.
question.
No, I appreciate it, and I appreciate the detail. This is really, I find it really really fascinating. And just a little bit too. I suspect. I mean, I'm not a mind reader. I have no idea, but so my family, my great grandpas, they were some of the first Utahns to come here and settle the state. So the Whitakers and the Kesslers, and there's this great big journal, diary, whatever it is, of my family history. And one of the things that you mentioned was the Freemasons and all of that, and that was so part of their day-to-day life and their culture, and influence and everything like that. And yeah, so I mean, honestly, what you're saying really makes sense to me, in that, because there are so many through lines um, between these, I don't know if you would say religious structures, or faith lines or anything, but there is a lot of overlap. So yeah, that makes sense um, why these things would seem so appealing, and like, oh, it's like building blocks, right? Because they are so layered.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In the spirit, I think of I think good faith in your conversation, and I think
Mm-hmm.
you asking for us to be recorded. Would it be okay if we share this on Spaces or no? Like, I just want to ask.
100%. 100%.
Okay, awesome.
Let's start with this. So, you've got your video where you are going through Melchizedek, right? And the corridor of Melchizedek. And I always find it helpful to first, like, strong man your position so I can demonstrate whether or not I understand it, right?
Okay.
So I have a couple notes, and if I could just go through them and just say, okay, this is what I understood from your video, and then we can get into it. And I do have a clarification question on this as well. So the main claim from your video is that proper understanding of Christ comes through only the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which gives the correct view of Melchizedek. And then you say that the Son was here before religion and earth, and that you equate God and the Son as masculine. I did have a clarification on this. When you say the sun, are we talking about the physical, literal ball in the sky sun, or the sun, SON, of God?
Okay. I was speaking about the literal sun in the sky. I want to
Okay.
just point of clarification as well. The only institutionalized religion where one can understand Christ is what and I want to get into why institutional religion matters for our time, but I do not want to exempt anybody who basically, my claim isn't that you must be a Latter-day Saints active member in order to properly understand Christ, but as an institution, it is the only institution of Christianity that properly understands Christ. Just So I guess I just triggered maybe both sides, but the
Okay. Okay.
that's my position.
Okay. And then you give a definition for what God is, at least in this context, which is a monotheistic inception point of everything. Does that
Correct.
sound accurate?
So I actually do more than not believe or ascribe to the Big Bang Theory, and then there was light. Like I do ascribe to that.
Okay.
And I did an illustration of kind of the way I see it in my head, but basically there was first there was just God, and then or source, right, as seculars would call it, and then God potentiated power, power to know itself diverged into force. Force created resistance, resistance created reaction, and then you see like a third dimensional version of the Star of David, or Merkaba, as many would call it. So visually, that's how I see it. And then the reason I say that church also is true in displacement is because whenever Celestia goes into three within it, I see it as densities, dimensions, and octaves, and those moving concurrently. So I think that'll give preface context to my view of why the church is true and how. Which maybe
Okay.
it's not contradictory to anything, but it's I think different to how it's classically depicted and viewed.
Right. And also I guess I need to refrain too, because I don't want to ascribe other conversations I've had with Latter-day Saints, those viewpoints to you. I actually generally accept the Big Bang as well. I think that it makes sense. I think really the only point of contention that I've come to with other Latter-day Saints is that it's kind of this ex nihilo, right? Like from nothing. Though that's what it seems like to me is demonstrated in the Big Bang when they, you know, when science says that everything was condensed down to an infinitely dense point. Infinitely dense seems like a cop out way of saying nothing,
I agree.
right? And so from nothing came the universe. And so that's the viewpoint. But anyway, so okay, so then just going on here. So okay, so the sun was here before religion and earth, and that you would equate God, which is the monotheistic conception point of everything, and the sun as a masculine force or energy. And it's kind of you put it in the way that you understand it as a electrical impulse, and then the feminine would be like the magnetic impulse, because when you have electricity, a byproduct of electricity is magnetism, um, and so that there's this causation and link between them. Um, so far, so good.
Yes.
Okay. And so then you claim that God's masculine corridor is Melchizedek. And one quote I jotted down from your video is that you say masculine became flesh. And this is the materialism phase, or there was another term that you used about like compressed atoms or something, right?
So I see it a little bit different than compressed atoms. Like, I only want to say that I only delineate that because I think that's a overly scientific term. I basically see the quote unquote fall of man. And again, all this was a vision. So it wasn't like I studied this somewhere, but it was humanity becoming denser and denser and denser to the point of physical materiality. So I would say that like Adam and Eve were a different density than like as we understand humans today. And I think maybe like Abraham and other things like that would point to that because of their lifespans and stuff like that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. And the reason why I want to get into this is because I think it helps to construct the worldview and then get into essentially the next piece of this, which is that the ashes to ashes, time decay, is kind of, I would agree that's kind of the Christian viewpoint, is that we're living on borrowed time essentially, and that, you know, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, you know, from where we came is where we're going to go, type of a mentality. But I think that your contention, and I do need clarification on it, but the alpha and the omega cannot be created or destroyed. And you mentioned this is the first law of thermodynamics, which obviously is accurate. But I wanted to get your opinion on this, or your viewpoint. is this law of thermodynamics essentially, if we look at it as layers, there's an outer ring, right? And within it, everything is contained. So is the law of thermodynamics, does that contain God, in which that's why he cannot be created or destroyed? Or is that we're seeing this law in our natural world as an expression of God's genuine nature? Does that
We're,
make sense what I'm
we're seeing
asking?
an expression of God's genuine nature. I wouldn't say
Okay.
that it is contained within a sphere. I would say that he would be the molecular aspect of the sphere itself and everything above, beyond, and within it. So it's present in all things. I had this conversation
Agreed.
with
I would.
Muslim leadership, whom I love, the Muslim community, but I had this. They're like, well, if ice cube and water, it's like, well, I'm talking about the molecular structure, not that if water happened, ice cube's not there. Like, so I think I associate those two kind of point of clarification to each other.
Well, and I would agree with you on that, and I think that it's important we have that viewpoint, because if we think that there's a greater context in which it's confining God, then we're not really talking. At least in my view, I'm not talking about God then, because
I
now
agree.
I'm talking about something that is contained within a larger framework, and I believe that God is the framework, right? And so
Correct.
that his will is what is creating everything. So we're seeing these expressions. So I would agree with you on that. Mhm.
Yeah, a point to that. I agree with everything you just said. I would say that God is not contained within anything, but I do believe he is expanding. And I think that's the way I saw it, the densities, dimensions, and octaves, the nature of the celestial kingdom and recapitulation, which we don't need to get into right now. But I do whereas I don't feel that he's containing anything, I do feel like it is expanding, and that's part of the nature of free will and the dialogue that we have during this time.
Okay. So far, so good. So then really it comes to these next points, which is the I guess the original sin, the fundamental understanding of the original sin, and the etymology of Satan. Those two seem to be and I do have a different view of what Melchizedek is, but I think that those are kind of where we're going to find the rub and the disagreement. So I would love if you could, what is the purpose, or I guess what is original sin? Why does the LDS view contrast to traditional Christian views, and where's the difference? What is the difference?
So I want to preface that I don't know that Latter-day Saints would enlarge individually in parts or segments agree with me in whole or in part. As I understand, they do not, or we do not ascribe to the original sin the same way everyone else views it. So I've heard, but then I've also heard people say the fall of Adam. So I don't know if that was culturally adopted or actual doctrine. So I want to just clarify and preface and say that. Um,
Sure.
so second to that, the concept of original sin, I believe, came in 300 something after Christ. I think you can pull up a new tab and look it up, but it was adapted. I think his name was Augustine that adapted the original sin. My quandary with so I do. Oh, yeah, I guess this is where I might sound really weird. And like a stereotypical like Latter-day Saints, even though I didn't learn that there, it was my own vision. But um, I believe that there was a quandary in Exodus, or rather that the nature of letting people go. I do believe that we were meant to come here to grow, and it was going to be like as Christians, we grow, learn about Christ, move on to the next density, heaven, however you want to call it. I do feel like there was an infiltration or a satanic black mirror, as you would call it. I feel like it was a byproduct of and then there was light. The being that there was God, and then power to know itself, context or anything like good and evil, potentiated force, which materialized to quote unquote Satan. And so it says the Zoom is running out of time. Okay, upgrade. I just pay for the upgrade and deal with it later. Um, oh crap. Okay, hopefully it'll let me upgrade it before I run out of time. But what was I gonna say? Um so I guess I would say that I feel like the in that quandary where the satanic impulse, after it was fragments or broken off, it took off almost on its own, right? And so I do believe that it casted, I guess, what you would call like a black mirror or the natural man, beyond the point that it was intended, and it imposed a black mirror upon the material world. And because we're all within God's natural law, he couldn't, quote unquote, explicitly lie like I think classical Christians depicted, but rather that he basically inverted the truth, and that inversion became the materialist world within the context of the material man or the natural man. And that which, for example, again, hopefully not sound too controversial, or I'm sure I will, but the very inception or understanding of Israel as a statutory state, I think that is the hallmark expression of the inversion, because it presumes a statutory jurisdiction rather than a holy state within us. But I think that quandary maybe paints a better picture of the variance or the my purview, I guess, of what I call the looking glass and maybe another.
So is original sin and the fall of Adam, are those disconnected in your view?
Well, I don't believe in the original sin. I believe that it's a overlay of a black mirror intended to break from Christ, because now you're juxtaposed. Now
Right.
you're otherized. Now you're separate. Now
Right.
you are like at the like I see like chickens with your head cut off, hoping for God's mercy in a vacuum rather than like any context of spiritual evolution and space and time and love and all of those things.
So this is and I'd be interested how you approach it, considering and you're right, the term, the or phrase original sin, this is a, you know, an AD kind of created phrase, but the idea existed in Genesis from, you know, 2,000 years prior to that, or more, right? I mean, the time of Moses and before. So the idea is that the garden, when we're in the garden, we're walking with God, we're communing with God, and we're acting as God's image to the earth, right? And dominion had been given to us, and we're working, or Adam and Eve were working to manage and rule. But the rebellion against God is what led to a separation. And so I hear what you're saying, and I agree with the categorization, but I guess I don't understand. To me, that separation, the being, you know, kicked out of the garden, the inability to walk in the garden with God any further, that separation is the entire mission of Christ, is to remake that. And we see this in that, you know, another thing that you said in your video is that that the earth will, you know, the ashes to ashes idea doesn't permit the earth to be destroyed. But actually what we see, and I mean, and unless I'm categorizing things or stating things incorrectly, but what we see is that in Revelation there is a new heaven and the new earth, and the current heaven and the current earth does pass away, and that the whole point is to get back to that garden state where we are reconciled back to Christ. We are united again with Christ, and that even the language is so intense that the church is called the bride of the Lamb. We are to be made one flesh, as a man and a woman, you know, is made one flesh. We are to be made one again with God. And so the point I would say is you're absolutely right that we were separated and cut off, but that's the mission of Christ, is to undo that and provide a way to reconcile his creation back to himself.
So again, so part of my position is that the Bible itself was infiltrated, and I know that's so. I guess I ascribe to like the idea of, I guess, rules are self-evident, so to speak. Um, And so give me a quick second. I upgraded so that I could pay or so that I
Yeah,
could continue, but for some reason, either it's not picking it up or it doesn't realize that I did. How do
I
I?
noticed something. I noticed something as well. Sorry, I know you're dealing with that problem. On X, we would probably want to start a new one and make sure that you record it.
Okay, so
Yeah.
maybe let's just do that. Okay, sorry.
Why? No, you're good. But why is my language not clear to you? Because you are unable to hear what I say. You belong to your father, the devil. You want to carry out your father's desire. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Yet, because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me. Can any of you prove me guilty of sin? Am I telling you the truth? Why don't you believe me? Whoever belongs to God hears what God says. The reason why you do not hear is that you do not belong to God. And I think that is that's
Who,
what I mean.
who is he
I
speaking to in that context?
This would be, and I'm not certain,
I
but I
am
know
going
he's
to
I don't
venture
know
to
if it's
guess,
the
but I don't want to.
Pharisees or the Sadducees, but it's one of
I
those.
think it matters. So I'm gonna venture to say that so the Pharisees would be today's rendition of neoliberals, right?
Let me look it up real quick.
The materialist worldview. So and this is where I think here's the thing. I do believe that everyone has lost nuance. I will tell anybody who defends, again, super controversial, but who defends what's happening right now in the Middle East as exactly that, the sons of Satan. Um not because of race, gender, religion, or anything like that, but because they are overtly, deliberately, and maliciously perpetuating the worst impulses of the worst crimes of the world under the banner of religion, right? Mike Johnson is, so it is an ungodly abomination that I call people of the Church of Satan, I think, more than anyone on the internet, that I know anyway. And so I don't, again, I don't disagree with presuming, I'm gonna venture to say, revelation or not, that who he's talking about is not that general population in the everyman.
So the text, this is just a search on AI, so take it for what it is. It says that it doesn't specify. It says more generally, quote, the Jews or the Jewish leadership. Pharisees were more commonly depicted in debates,
I don't
and the
want to say it's
Sadducees were less
incorrected, but
numerous.
I think everyone knows where I was going with that. Again, I didn't know what you were talking about or where you were coming from, but immediately, you know what I mean? Like, and that's these things become self-evident. I think I didn't know you were going to quote that. I didn't know who he was talking to or that particular passage, but I think, yeah, again, I think these things become self-evident as you develop, and I would bridge that to also mean neoliberalism at large, right? The entire, again, this, I wouldn't say that this is gender, age, religion, so to speak, insofar of materialism and that one views a purely materialist existence and other dispensations don't. But I think neoliberalism at large, even in the color of Christ, prosperity gospel, right? That there's, if you're in a black mirror, there is zero reason to believe that financial success is a marker of God's favoritism because it's a black mirror. Um, so I think there's plenty of Christians in that jurisdiction. But
Yes.
sorry, I didn't
So
mean to
sorry.
run all over you with that. But I just immediately felt like, wait, I know who that's for, and I don't think it's for the you or I. I don't think it's for the everyman.
And I don't know. I may have a slight disagreement. I think it may be more generally speaking. I don't know if it was because his audience was to the Jews at the time. That may extrapolate to the rest of us because we are still not doing. He says you do the will of your father, right? And if I'm not Jewish, but if I at the time was doing the same thing that maybe the Jewish people were doing, or whatever, I don't think that that condemnation would slip over me, right? But regardless, I
Can I
yeah.
say something about
So
that
and,
really quickly? Because
yeah,
having
yeah,
been
sure.
Kabbalah and all, and I love, I mean, I have a ton, I love and revere a lot of my Jewish friends. I truly do. Here's why, right? And here's why it's because the quandary here with at least with Jewish Zionism is that Jesus was not the Christ. But why was he not the Christ in their view? Because there's a purely materialist view of jurisdictional dispensation whereby many of them believe that a sacking coming to them would hand them the keys of world dominion over the um goyim, or the everyman, which would translate into our rendition of an antichrist. It is effectively a one world order, a purely materialist, insofar that I don't even know that I would call Christian
Right.
Zionism a religion at all, because they believe in a purely human materialist king with no supernatural ends, whereby they inherit, or this king gives them the keys of a worldwide jurisdiction, whereby they would have seniority or priority, or everyone else have serves. That to us means a one world, new world order with a centralized power, right? And that power hinges on a purely materialist endeavor. And so I would say the delineation isn't who their personal fathers are. And I would not attribute this even to the Jews. I would say American Christians are actually Luciferians. Luciferians or Messianic Jews. They're not, I wouldn't call them Christian. But anybody that has this imperialist, materialist endeavor in the color of God, of no matter what you call that God, is a insofar of their materialist purview, I would a child of Satan by the black mirror ashes to ashes world in which not only they choose to operate in, but endeavor to purely those ends, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I definitely, I don't know that I would go as far as say that the church is Luciferian, but I would say that there is a lot of, the great thing is that the gospel is simple. The gospel is simple, but the word is infinite because our God is infinite. I think that he preserved his word so that it would make it through the millenniums, and and through the years, and it would be here for us to process and understand. But yes, there's a lot that has been left. I think that there's a lot of escapism. I think that there's a lot of like, oh, I can't wait just to go to heaven, right, and sit on a cloud and play a harp. And this is in no way, shape, or form what the calling is. A matter of fact, Hebrews, in Hebrews it talks about that there was the Jews in the wilderness that were being led to the Holy Land. The promise was given to them that they would enter into God's rest, and they didn't. They didn't enter into it, but that promise was kept open for God's people, which are the Christians, which are those that put themselves in Christ, and that we are now the inheritors of this rest. And this is why he was talking about this is the law is no more, but what we have is the good works. And so Jesus healed someone on the Sabbath, and they said, "What are you doing? You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, right?" Those are the works that we're supposed to do. And at the white throne judgment, Jesus will say, you fed the hungry, you comforted those that needed comfort, right? You clothed the naked, all of those things, because those are the works that Jesus did on the Sabbath, and we are in the Sabbath in that we have taken up God's rest, according to the theology laid out from the book of Hebrews. Um, and
So
anyway,
we're definitely going to end on a cliffhanger, because explain to me
okay.
how that's not Messianic Judaism and not in the color of Christian. Because it sounds to me like the endeavor is the same. You just put a new banner on it.
Sorry, can you clarify? I guess I don't know what you're.
So, okay. So everything you just said depicts exactly the Jewish endeavor in the banner of Christ. So it's basically saying instead of you getting the global statutory jurisdiction, now you're going to get it. But there's still going to be an imperialist statutory jurisdiction of a worldwide nature
Yes,
with a similarly situated. So that's
yes,
that sounds
and
to
it's
me Messianic Judaism, not remotely Christian at all.
um well, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Christ is Lord. And in that world, there is no dissension, right? Eventually, all of death and Satan and the devils that followed him, they will be cast into the pit of fire and done away with. And so yes, eventually that will be
In
there. But
that world, they will. In that
no,
looking glass. And I'm not saying so. Okay, so
right,
this
right.
we can leave this the cliffhanger because actually this is really
Okay,
good.
sounds good. Okay.
But so I actually I have two I have an apex on this every niche about. One is realizing that it is that inner child within you and that has been self-betrayal the whole time you went into materialism, and like that heartbreak, that realizing that was always within you. And I wrote I think a channel sequence like a few months ago, and if you read it I think it'll actually, it starts with and unto us a child was born. And if you put that on my Twitter, you'll see it. And it's one of my favorite. It's one of the least interest, or like the least, I would say, revelatory stuff, but it was maybe one of my favorite channelings that I ever saw. Um, so I have that. So is that surrender into like, oh my God, I betray, like a surrender of self betrayal and unconditional love is part of how I see that in whole. But in this context where you're illustrating where on the basis of this new banner, the same New World Order, because really it's what it's speaking. It's speaking within this material body, within this. It's all things are the same.
Mhm.
Natural is just now a new banner. So it's why I would say again that Latter-day Saints, I would say, is true insofar that not just a placement of Christ and Melchizedek and all those things, but also the way they open their prayer, the way they close their prayer, the language, like it properly aligns you. Whereas I think, in my view, this rendition of Messianic Judaism, you're still in the looking glass. You just put a new stamp on it, so to speak, is how I see it. And we can expound on that a lot more,
Well,
on
yeah, I
another
mean,
episode.
yeah, that's fine. I guess I would just leave it with this. The Jews were very, and I think you're right, it was very materialistic. It was very, they were looking for a warrior king to come and lead a battle against the oppressing forces, and it was
And still
very
are.
worldly. Right. Okay. Yes. And it's very worldly. But Jesus says that his kingdom is not of this world, for if they were of this world, he wouldn't be arrested, right? He wouldn't be crucified.
Oh, right.
Um, right. And so he also says that, in the kingdom of God, he points around. He says, "You see how this is being done? This is not how it's done in the kingdom of God. For if you want to be great, you
Correct.
must be servant of all." Right.
100%.
And so this is this, but there is going to be a remaking, and so it's a different heaven, it's a different earth, it's a new creation, mirrored together, put together, right? And I do see that. I don't know that there's anything that exists apart from that, aside from that. And so yeah, it's I guess I would have to say that that is the order to come, is a complete merger. And Jesus in the millennium, right? He comes back. There's 1,000 years of peace where all the evil and everything's chained up, right? Jesus says, "I only do what I've seen my Father do," right? And then for that 1,000 years, he will to reign. And I'm going to say this is my own speculation, okay? But I've been thinking about this recently. He will sit on a throne, or he will reign over the earth at that time. And for 1,000 years, those that were alive at the time will watch him and work with him and see this. And I think that then again, after the 1,000 years, evil will be released, right? And I think that what is to happen is that we are to do only what we've seen Jesus do, as Jesus only did what he saw the Father do. And because Paul says to us, "Do you not know that you will judge angels, right? And I think that this is the idea, is that we're to be harmonized. You mentioned this, the two greatest commandments, right? Love your God. But so our God is one, but this has multiple meanings. It means one in number, but it means one as in wholeness, unity,
Right. Right.
oneness,
I agree.
right?
I agree.
And we're to join in on that oneness. And so I suspect when Paul says, "Do you not know you will judge angels?" that maybe, just maybe, that's where that happens. I don't know,
I
but I'll leave it there.
agree in large part with it. Yeah, I think it's definitely a good place to leave it. I don't disagree. I would simply say that within looking at it within the okay, so I could say, okay, so you're saying it's Christian because you're saying that it'll fundamentally change. It won't be as we see it. And so that's why you're saying is it's not, as my claim, a Messianic Judaism rendition, because there is a transformation. Did I
Yes.
say that correctly? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Um, okay. I guess in my concurrent Latter-day Saint through line view, I agree in large part. I think it'll be a lot more seamless, meaning that the world will not be as anyone's known it within the looking glass. So it's almost like the lifting of the veil is already happening. And so in some ways, I'm actually more literal than I think both Latter-day Saints and Christians. So for example, we've never known a world where humanity hasn't been in bondage by powers that be, right? Like that's not happened really. We've not known a world where sovereignty exists. We've not known a world where our food isn't poisoned, right? And so in some ways, I think it can be a lot more subtle. 1,000 years also reminds me of, I think, wasn't that how old Abraham, or like it was around how
Roughly
long they
like
so it also kind of integrates
980
like
or something. Yeah.
yeah, so it also kind of integrates with the shift in density. I think we left in a really good note. I I I don't know that I don't know. So I am still as strong on my Latter-day Saint position. You having grown up there, I don't know if you have anything to say or to add, or I mean, I think this is amazing conversation. I don't, and I think something that I think should be promoted and embraced by a lot more members of all churches. I think sometimes we fall short in, by we, I say Latter-day Saints. I also believe that you should take responsibility or account for quandaries within your own jurisdiction before you cast stones at others too, personally. So I think sometimes we're too adverse in our own faith to endeavor into an honest conversation. And I hope we have more of those from the side of Latter-day Saints personally.
I would agree. And I do have an aim, when I'm looking at the bride of Christ. This body's not divided. We're not against ourselves, right?
Agree.
And there's to be unity, there's to be oneness. And so I think, and I would love to pick up on this, I think we should do it. The world and structure of God is oneness and unity and whole, but you can see that God had split people up and split up the nations in the Tower of Babel. But at the cross and afterwards, it was a reversal. It was almost like this record was playing backwards, in that instead of separation, and then division, and then all of this, all of a sudden we have one people, one language, right? Because they were speaking this language, but everyone heard it in their own language. So there was this like unification of language, and then one bride and one church, and all of a sudden there's the it starts going the other way, where it's
Right.
now about unification. So I appreciate the conversation. I hope that it leads to more unity in the body of Christ. And yeah, so thank you very much. I look forward to the next time we talk.
Yeah, I do too. It was amazing talking to you. It really, truly was. This was awesome. So yeah, anytime, let me know. I am blessed enough to be able to make my own schedule right now. So yeah, it was amazing talking. I really appreciate it. I hope there's more conversation about it. And it sounds like we mostly agree on the same things. I guess. Yeah, I guess we'll see on the next one. I think the next topic to address will be, I think, interesting is New Jupiter or New Jerusalem, because I think that one gets people really riled up, and I think that would be a fun one to discuss.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Awesome.
All right, Ruben, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.